Rise and shine, gamer. It's time for another trip down nostalgia road. How's it going, everybody? My name is Mathis, and we are back with another unboxing video. Mama Mathis came on through and sent one of the biggest boxes I had prepared from before the move, with over 40 big box PC games, and I am really excited to go through this one. There's a load in here that are like, I have childhood memories from, games that I've loved as I grew up, as well as just series that are just classic. This box is kind of like, there's a lot of big box PC essentials, I guess I might call them, if you were into collecting big box PC games like myself. Just games that may not necessarily be all that hard to find, but if you were gonna collect, you're gonna want them in your collection just because of how important they were to gaming history as a whole, and if you're into that sort of thing. And if you're just here for the nostalgia shot, hang tight, we're about to get going. Unlike the last one that had like 30 games, there's a lot more in here that are big box and only like one or two that have any tiny boxes. I'm gonna start with one of the tiny boxes one. This is a game from a developer that kind of became a pretty damn good one over time, Heretic. It says published by the people who made Doom, but it was developed by Raven Software. If you know anything about Raven Software, the only thing I can think of, and I know they've done a lot of other games, other than Heretic, of course, is the X-Men Origins Wolverine game, which was actually pretty good. But Heretic, honestly, is kind of like a fantasy Doom. I do remember playing this as a kid, and it scared the hell out of me. The darker corridors, the monster noises, all of it just really freaked out kid Mathis, so I didn't make it too far. But what I remember of it just reminded me of Doom, but with a fantasy skin for those like myself who prefer, I think, fantasy over big boomy shotgun sticks sometimes, you know? Next on the list is one that definitely came from Zerbite, one of my viewers who sent me a huge box, many boxes of his collection. And this one is Knights of Zentar. I don't know if Dean's gonna be able to find any gameplay footage of it out there. I think he can probably find one or two, but this is plain and simple, it's a hentai game, dude. All boobaloobies, dude. That's all anybody cares about. Just them big old mommy milkers. This box is kind of awful in that it's not very pleasant to look at with its weird kind of color schemes. It's just bright reds and dark black and blues, which is kind of bizarre. But the biggest offender on this box of all is the back. Can you read that? Can you read it? Can you read it? Gold on red with gold lines. I don't know who made that executive decision with this box art, but it's terrible. Outside of that, it's an extremely grindy, extremely difficult RPG. That's all I know about it from what little I've seen. I always intended to play this at some point, but I don't know if I can get a working version on a modern computer, so I'm gonna need to build myself a gaming PC from around this era to play it, which I will eventually. What I love about this box is that the running theme is kind of point-and-click adventures and first-person RPGs of the era, and that's what this is. This is Lands of Lore with, I believe, Patrick Stewart voicing the narrator in this game. Lands of Lore was made by Westwood Studios, who obviously so many people know from Command & Conquer, and this was a first-person RPG in the vein of Might and Magic around this time. You were going to be dungeon crawling with a party that you created, unveiling stories and secrets and exploring for treasure while murdering hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of monsters, potentially causing genocide on goblins. What I like about this one is that while it came out in the early 90s or so, the art and the color scheme in this game pops so brightly. There's some interesting monster designs, and they really went all out to try and make it kind of as flashy as they could for this era. And while I personally haven't played Lands of Lore, I have seen a lot of gameplay of it because there was a time 6 months ago I was really getting into old school RPGs like this, and this was one of them I almost played and I did a lot of like research on. It's just a really pretty game to look at, and this box art is nuts. I love it. Look at that old man. Like the guy who becomes the Crypt Keeper or something. I don't even know what to tell you. Going from RPG back into point and click, Rama by Sierra. Sierra was the golden child of point and click adventures in this era, and nearly everything they produced became some form of success. Now, Rama I hadn't heard of, but what was interesting about getting this box and why I ended up picking it up is because the sci-fi story that was crafted for this game was from world famous author Arthur C. Clarke, as well as Gentry Lee, which I almost forgot to mention. Those names alone carry a lot of weight for those who are fans of their work, and especially around this time. So it's surprising I had never heard of Rama before. And I figured there might be people out there who really love the point and click genre who may not have heard of it as well. So if you are interested in checking this game out, again, it's called Rama. Luckily nowadays, playing more retro games on modern PCs is super easy with GOG, and Rama is actually on there. So if you're a point and click fanatic and haven't checked this out, well worth going over in GOG and at least maybe grabbing it and checking it out yourself. It's probably pretty cheap. And if you have played Rama, let me know in the comments how it is. This next set of games, we're gonna go through super quickly, mostly because there's not much to look at and there's a lot of similarities between them all, and that is the Zork Collection. I own every Zork game minus one, the Grand Inquisition. And if you haven't played any Zork games, they're worth checking out. These were masterful games back from when they were launched in the 80s and the 90s. A text-based adventure that went out of its way to make sure it felt like you had full control as to what was going on in the world around you. Zork is a unique experience even in today's standards because of how much flexibility there was built into these games from the early 80s and late 90s, stuff that you wouldn't see in more proper 3D games for at least another decade. The favorite box Zork I have in my collection though is the Zork Trilogy. This came out in the late 80s and is arguably a collector's edition, if there were collector's editions back then. When you open the box right away, there's this little pamphlet that has this in-game world breakdown of how the governments work and trade routes and all kinds of stuff about the land of Zork. And as you open the box itself, there's a collectible memorabilia coin that's straight up metal, not plastic, a pamphlet for tourists who are coming to Zork, and all kinds of things. Now, most big box PC games had feelies in them, but only really special editions of games came with all that extra stuff like that. And again, back in the 80s, I imagine this was not a very common thing to see. The last tiny box in this box is Civ 3. If you haven't played any of the Civilization games, Civ 3 might be the one that modernized Civ as we know it today. However, in the grand scheme of things, I feel like Civ 3 kind of gets forgotten about and left behind. People who prefer the older Civ usually stick with Civ 2, and then when the more modern Civs became prevalent, Civ 4 seemed to be the one most people latched onto for a good long time. In the Civilization world, Civ 3 kind of sits as a forgotten child of sorts. The only first-person shooter in this box is one of those games that any big box PC collector needs to have in their collection, and that's the original Half-Life. What is there to say about this game that hasn't been said? It broke new ground for generations to come, and then arguably Half-Life 2 took all that, upended it, and did even more. Without Half-Life 1, there wouldn't be a Half-Life 2. The Half-Life box has a beautiful gatefold that opens to show this gorgeous shot in-game of head crabs and zombies and soldiers running about the place with Gordon Freeman just trying to run away. I know there's an endless list of games that people like me tell you need to play if you want to get the full gaming experience, but genuinely, Half-Life 1 is a must play. Simply to just know where the roots of modern shooters kind of got their start. Half-Life was a game changer. While the last couple of boxes were filled with RTSs and city builders, this one only really has one, and it's a city builder more than anything. And it's called Afterlife: Last Warden Sims. I love the box. First of all, it's unopened. This is one of my very few sealed games. The box can be flipped either way. You got that heaven and hell kind of theming here. And the overall goal is kind of SimCity-esque, except instead of building a city, you're literally building an afterlife for souls who are passing on, come live in and spend their time. It's a unique twist on the formula that I'd love to see explored in more modern games. I'm sure there's a few indie ones that kind of mess with that idea, but to create a Valhalla or any type of afterlife, I think is a fun twist on the city builder formula that I'd love to see explored further on. If you're a regular viewer of my content from before the big move, you saw this box being displayed prominently in almost every video, and that's the original Sims. I lost a huge chunk of my life to The Sims when it came out, and so did my siblings, especially my sister. There's years of just good memories, creating houses, burning people to death, taking away the ladder so they drown in a pool, and other crazy stuff that just could happen in this series that was really new at the time. The Sims 4 now may be being squeezed and milked for every drop that it can, but Sims games, the original one and all the expansions, really meant something special and truly made you appreciate a simulation game in a more lighthearted, cartoony way that was way more accessible to people beyond the nerds like myself who loved the more granular and detailed simulation games out there. This next one is a classic that I think gets overlooked when lists of classic games get put together by people, and that's American McGee's Alice. So many people speak about this action-adventure platformer with nothing but love and praise, and yet it took an eternity to get a sequel for it, and I feel like that sequel is even less acknowledged than the first one. Now, to be fair, I haven't played the sequel for varying reasons, but the first one I've played multiple times and need to do a video on properly here on the channel someday. I'm sure you're getting sick of hearing me say this, but this is another must play. But I will put the caveat for those who enjoy action-adventure platformers. If you don't fall into that category, you can safely pass this one by. All right, another rapid-fire set of games. The first one I'm just gonna briefly mention because this is genuinely one I know super little about, but it's from a series of games that I love. Might and Magic, World of Zine. It's a first-person, point-and-click, fantasy RPG with 3D graphics. The box art is freaking awful. There's nothing on this box that really tells you what this game is about, and when you flip it over, it kind of explains how the game is played, but the screenshots just look like a first-person RPG, but it explains it's a simple point-and-click. I don't know what this game's about. If you've played Might and Magic World of Zine, let me know. But in addition to that, a couple boxes ago, I unboxed Heroes of Might and Magic 6, Mandate of Heaven, and I've got the following two sequels here on this one. This is Might and Magic 7 for Blood and Honor, and Might and Magic 8, Day of the Destroyer. Each one of these was a vast improvement on the one that came before. So much so that there's a huge mod out there that actually ties all three games, 6, 7, and 8, together using 8's engine and its graphical capabilities, but allowing you to actually play all three games with a small storyline that actually stitches them together. Many say that that's the definitive way to play. I have yet to test it. I've played these individually, and that's about it. Regardless, 6, 7, and 8 I feel are essential in any PC gaming collection as they're definitive representations of their genre at the time, and perhaps still are the pinnacle of what they ever could achieve. Next up, another batch of games, this one from Virgin Entertainment, point-and-click adventures that are classics. First up in this 3-set of FMV point-and-clicks is The Seventh Guest, a murder-haunted mystery for you to figure out and go through. This was in the heyday of FMV point-and-clicks, so strap yourself in for cheesy acting, really silly-looking situations and gore, and some laughs that I'm sure at the time weren't meant to be all that funny. In that same vein, and a direct sequel to The Seventh Guest, is The 11th Hour. Same thing, more cheesy FMV, but the quality of the 3D modeling went up a little bit in the sequel. I guess the success of the first one had them a little bit of a bigger budget. But this last one of the three, this is the one people probably remember, Phantasmagoria. Of course you remember it. There's a whole lot of sexy stuff that happens in here too, on top of murder. For a young teen at this time, and even for adults, I'm sure this was super shocking. I guess nowadays the question is, do FMV and point and clicks hold up? You know, I miss FMV point and click adventures. I know there's a few of them that pop up every so often on modern game stores, but I'd love to see a renaissance of some sort of more FMV point and clicks. Beyond the major point and clicks like the FMV ones and a lot of Sierra stuff, I wasn't huge into the point and click world at the time. So these next two are kind of weird, and well, one of them I think you'll see why I picked it up. First is a Sierra game that I had never played called The Lighthouse. It's simply one that is a mystery, and I love Myst style games, and that's what it seems to be. It's even got a lot of the same art style. It's got this fantasy mechanical world to explore. Just one of those games that I looked at and was like, yeah, I want to play that at some point, and I might as well put it into my collection. This one I'm probably not going to play, but you'll see why I have it. The Daedalus Encounters. Got some FMV. Even got some decent looking 3D modeled stuff in the back. However, I'm sure it's friggin' terrible. It's got Tia Carrere from Wayne's World and True Lies. I'd never. And it's all about a cold, dark heart of a ravaged galaxy and a scavenger. Oh my, it's just a typical sci-fi story. But it's got like the worst looking props. Like there's a point where the cheese can cross over into just plain bad, and I don't think those Virgin Entertainment games really cross that line too often. This looks like it just crosses the line before you even open the box. Maybe I will play it at some point and cover it in a video, but it looks so ungodly awful. Any millennial like myself is going to recognize these next two, especially if you had a school where you had a classroom and a computer in the back, and once a week, you got to go back there and play the games on it. You were either playing one of two things: the Oregon Trail, which I don't actually have boxed yet, or you were playing Where in the World is Carmen San Diego, which was the one I probably played the most. You don't know what Carmen San Diego is? It's a point and click made for kids aimed at being educational, teaching you about places in the world, capitals, all while chasing Carmen San Diego, who stole usually a huge piece of history or some magnificent art, and you need to return it back to where it was taken from. That usually involved capturing smaller criminals and figuring out little mysteries and puzzles, again, all aimed at educating the kid. It even had a spin-off TV show that I absolutely loved, and the theme song is friggin' killer. And another Freddy Fish game. I already talked about it a little bit in the last unboxing. Freddy Fish is just a game for kids that's point and click, but even easier. And the Freddy Fish series means a lot to me because I played a lot of it with my siblings growing up. There's a lot of memories kind of trapped, quote unquote, in this game. I lied. I actually do have one more RTS in this box that I forgot was even in here. By Bungie Entertainment. Myth 2, Soulbinder. If you don't know, Bungie, before they did Halo, and I think Halo was originally going to be an RTS, they did RTS games, usually pretty good ones too, really unique ones, and this is another one. This is early 3D days, you're looking at the early 2000s, late 90s, so on and so forth. And this was another fantasy RPG sequel to Myth, which I do not own. But Myth is a game that a lot of people have very, very fond memories of. And this is kind of unique for its time. Myth had a map editor. Not a ton of games had map editors back then, but it would become more common as the years went on, and nowadays, if you don't have a map editor in your RTS, what are you even doing? I mean, this game tried to do a lot of stuff that was unique, being able to siege castles and attack from the tops and having a ranged high advantage, just stuff that you wouldn't normally think about in an RTS from this era, when a lot of it was just kind of one plain army meeting army. Sierra didn't always do point and clicks. They did deviate as time went on to try and crack into other genres that are becoming more and more popular, particularly the RPG genre, because it kind of did what the point and clicks were doing, but with more gameplay. And one of their pretty successful attempts was the Crondor series. And here is the sequel to one of the Crondor games, Return to Crondor. It's a third-person 3D adventure game. It's a tactical turn-based RPG where it actually used motion capture of actors to capture movements of their 3D models. As you can see, the gatefold box, they have these gorgeous portraits of the characters. And while I think the name is a little unfortunate, Crondor just doesn't, I feel like, roll off the tongue and isn't very easily marketable, there is an era of Sierra Studios that is often kind of looked past in favor of their point and click stuff. One day I definitely want to cover Sierra's RPG attempts. A game that I had never heard of when I initially got it by a company that I had never heard of when I ended up picking it up is a game called Realms of Arcadia Star Trail. This is a unique RPG because the exploration aspect of the game is first person, like a lot of games of the era where you're going through dungeons and outdoor environments and exploring as you move through. However, the combat of this game is where it took a deviation from its brothers and sisters of the genre, where it became an isometric turn-based action game. You build a party and you explore levels, but when combat happens, instead of it happening in real time in first person where you're spamming buttons and trying to do damage, instead you're positioning your party members and attacking things on a strategic map. Really unique. And then another game by Origin, who you may know as they did a lot of space simulation games back then, also dabbled into the first-person RPG genre with Shadowcaster. There's nothing really special that sticks out about this one, especially if you're just looking at the box and trying to figure out what it's about. A lot of the screenshots and the gameplay are going to give you a general idea that this game is just another one to heap onto the pile of first-person RPGs. Now, a classic of Sierra's, King Quest V. Kind of a random one to have out of all of them, but the box is gorgeous. King's Quest is one of the defining point and clicks that have ever existed. They were fun and funny stories with heartfelt endings that really pulled at a lot of players' strings. Even a few years ago, they ended up making a new King's Quest, showing that there are still loads of people out there who love this type of game, and in particular, this character in this world. Back when the Diablo-style games were really popular, you started seeing a lot more of those isometric action RPGs hitting the scene, and one that was thrown out there but never really found success was Darkstone. Maybe it was just a little too generic, or maybe there were just too many games like that out on there, or maybe it just wasn't that good of a game. But Darkstone has a gorgeous cover that definitely caught my eye, but it's a game that seems to have been forgotten in the annals of history. You could zoom in and out and even move the camera a full 360 degrees, which was pretty unique for this game back then. There was even a random quest generator built into this so you could replay it over and over, hunting for that perfect gear. But for whatever reason, it just never took off and that spark never caught fire. All right, we're in the home stretch of this box, so we're gonna start pushing through. Arcanum is an RPG that should have gotten more love, in the vein of Baldur's Gate, but a little darker, a little meaner, and a lot more player influence allowed. This is one of those that I wish we had seen a sequel for, or maybe even a reattempt in modern day. And even made magic kind of dangerous and outlawed in aspects of the world. Your choices, what class you played, would actually directly impact how characters in the world would talk or treat you. It's as though they took the fantasy world and just made all the characters very, very human at heart, for better and for worse. Back to the Might and Magic series, I know we covered some first-person RPGs, but these stand out in their spin-off stuff from the Might and Magic series. The first one is Heroes of Might and Magic 3. This is a game I played with my siblings a ton. It was a turn-based RPG where you were just trying to dominate and take over the map by any means necessary. Almost a light 4X, but diplomacy wasn't a huge factor in these games. It was all about building up your army, making as much money as you can, finding artifacts to equip your hero, and taking your hero and his army of undead or dragons or monsters or minotaurs or fairies and destroying the opponent and taking everything that they had for yourself. Might and Magic also attempted to go into the world of like a third-person action RPG with Crusaders of Might and Magic. Now, I played this game a ton as a kid, but not the PC version, the PS1 version, which I can't imagine was really the right way to play it. My memory of it is that it was extremely clunky, hard to play, very difficult, and didn't explain itself all that well. But that's also my memory from playing it over 20 years ago. As I begin to chip away at the Might and Magic series with Judge Mathis videos here on the channel, you can definitely expect a Crusaders of Might and Magic video. Now, I actually covered this on my initial 1-year anniversary of Judge Mathis. Oh God, what is that, 4 years ago now? Knox, another Diablo clone, quote unquote, made by Westwood, but really not a Diablo clone. It was a much more narrative-driven experience based upon the class that you ended up playing when you played. There were only 3 classes to choose from as opposed to 8, 9, 10, however many you could choose in other games of its ilk, but each one had a completely unique gameplay experience and a story twist that made each playthrough unique. Mechanically though, you're gonna expect similar stuff if you've played any other third-person action RPG. Another 4X to go along with the Civilization game that I pulled earlier, and one that I wish we would see a proper sequel to, is Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri. If you're a fan of the 4X genre, then you already know what this game is and why it's so loved amongst the people who have played it. And if you haven't, play it. I know we got a sci-fi Civilization to try and capture what this game once was, but it's not the same thing. It's not even close to the same thing. And you can get this on a ton of different platforms right now on the PC. So if you are a fan of 4X and you haven't friggin' played Alpha Centauri, play it or I'm gonna come over to your house and spank you. All right? Last 2 point and clicks, both from LucasArts. One I did a video on already, and one I haven't. The one I did the video on is Full Throttle. This is a beautiful masterpiece of a point and click. Yeah, it's got some obscure puzzles that I had to look up because I just couldn't figure it out because the solution was friggin' weird. But the characters, the writing, even the animation is so good, and they frickin' remade it and released it so you could have the old graphics if you want, or the new animation style, which is the version I played and reviewed. Full Throttle is, I hate saying it, man, but it's a must play for point and click fans. Play it. I won't say the same goes for Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis because I mostly don't know too much about this game. A lot of Indiana Jones games have pretty positive history behind them, but I don't know which ones are good, which ones are bad, and which ones kind of sit in between. This one is certainly not the first one, and it looks kind of neat in the back end, but I'm not gonna say it looks promising. There's a few screenshots back here that look like it might be a little clunky even for its time. But but I could be talking out of my ass. I'm just going off of what I'm looking at in the box here. All right, final 3 games, probably the best games of this box, the ones that are probably worth the most monetarily, but for me, just mean the most. First, Fallout Tactics. Fallout spin-off that basically was just a tactics game. It's written on the box, it's as advertised, people. I remember this game coming out, and I feel like I remember it not being received incredibly well. However, when I did my research about how people feel about it now, there seems to be a much more positive memory attached to Fallout Tactics. Maybe it's because we haven't had really a true Fallout game in this vein, or at least in an isometric vein, really in 15, 20 years, something like that. Maybe it's because it is a lot better than people gave it credit for when it did release. But in that same vein, Fallout 2. Not complete in box. I think it's missing like 1 or 2 separate things, but mostly in box here. And this is another one that I got from Zerbite, and this box is in incredible condition. It's got a cellophane wrap all over it, except for at the bottom, where that's where it was opened and played. And it's just a beautiful, I mean, Fallout games, to get them in their big box are super annoying and super expensive. So to be able to say I have this in box means a lot to me, and it means a lot for my collection. I really take good care of these things because, oh man, Fallout, you've made my life so good over there. And last but certainly not least is the hardest Elder Scrolls games to get your hands on. Elder Scrolls 2, Daggerfall. The box is this beautiful kind of holographic effect, and the art itself on it is sick. Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall is really the Elder Scrolls that set the mold for future and what would become modern Elder Scrolls games. The openness of it is still mind-boggling, especially for the era it came out in. And back then in these games, there was an element of simulation happening. You could own a house, days and night would pass, things would change. The world itself was kind of as alive as it could be for the best that the developers could do with the technology at their hands at this time. And then moreover, this game is so goddamn expensive to get in box nowadays, and having it in the collection is just a relief because I want to have the whole Elder Scrolls collection in their individual boxes. This is one of my favorite pieces in my collection and one that I prominently display often. And that's it. I tried to get through as fast as I could. I know it was a long one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you've been enjoying these little trips down Nostalgia Ave. It's been really fun to relive my childhood and remember why I loved some of these games that I loved. And for the ones that I'd never played, just remind myself why I picked them up and why I'm excited to try them out in the future. If you have a favorite game that I popped out of this box, or you have games in your collection you just want to talk about and show off, let me know in the comments. I am such a fan of collecting, and hearing other people's and seeing other people's collection is a thing of pure joy for me. On that, I'm off. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.